Olá a todos e todas. É com muita honra que nós, como representantes da equipe da Universidade Federal de Pelotas e do Instituto Federal Sul-Rio-Grandense, que estamos aqui como responsáveis pela realização do Gráfica 2024, né? Estarmos aqui fazendo um pré-evento. Né? Todos sabem que nós tivemos a necessidade de adiar o evento, que seria exatamente nesta data, hoje, amanhã, estaríamos todos reunidos aqui na Universidade Federal de Pelotas e no Instituto Federal Sul-Rio-Grandense, estaríamos aqui na cidade de Pelotas, nesse momento, mas estamos, então, marcando com duas palestras, que gentilmente, e uma parceria muito oportuna e importante para nós, que no Gráfica nós temos como um dos temas como inteligências em simbiose. Nós trazemos tanto hoje quanto amanhã duas palestras, hoje com o Branco Kolarevic e amanhã com o Francisco Seron. Né? Os dois tratando sobre esse tema, envolvendo inteligência artificial, que foi uma das motivações que provocamos em todos os autores a pensar, né, a comunidade da Associação Brasileira de Expressão Gráfica a pensar sobre este tema tão importante nesse momento, né? E agradecemos, então, essa parceria de aceitar o nosso convite em fazer essa abertura, como marcar essa data, e já aproveitamos para anunciar que amanhã nós estaremos também lançando o nosso pré-print, que todos os autores já receberão, né, para fazer as suas aprovações da versão dos anais. Estamos com a versão já praticamente fechada. Amanhã faremos, então, esse lançamento, junto à palestra do professor Francisco Seron. Então, assim, desde já agradeço, reforço o convite para que todos se organizem para estar presencialmente conosco em maio, de 27 a 30 de maio, de 2025 conosco aqui em Pelotas, né? Será, assim, um prazer recebê-los e esperamos realizar um evento, assim, com muita potência para a nossa área. E, bom, estou aqui só para, né, marcar, estou aqui com a Tássia, da Universidade Federal de Pelotas, colega, companheira, com a Cíntia também, da universidade, e com a Luciana Sandrini, né, que é do Instituto Federal Sul-Rio-Grandense. A nossa equipe é grande, gostaríamos de estar todos aqui recebendo vocês. Estamos aqui como representante, por isso que é uma grande honra estar, né, nós quatro aqui. Então, assim, um prazer, e já convido a professora Luísa Félix, também da Universidade Federal de Pelotas, também da área de expressão gráfica, que vai apresentar o nosso palestrante de hoje, que é o professor Branco Kolarevic. Então, muito obrigada, e vamos lá. Obrigada, Luísa.
Obrigada, Adriane. Bom, é um prazer, então, de apresentar e agradeço a presença. Thank you, Branco, so much for being here with us today on the first day to mark the original dates of Gráfica. Vou apresentar o professor Branco, é professor e foi diretor do Hillier College of Architecture and Design, da New Jersey Institute of Technology, em Newark. Ele lecionou arquitetura em várias universidades da América do Norte e palestrou mundialmente sobre o uso de tecnologias digitais no design e na produção, em arquitetura. Ele é autor e editor, né, de vários livros dessa área, já atuou também como presidente de várias organizações, incluindo a Acadia e a Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture. Ele tem escrito, lecionado e pesquisado sobre tecnologias digitais em arquitetura e design há bastante tempo, orientou, né, diversos alunos, inclusive eu. Portanto, é um prazer para mim dar as boas-vindas para o professor Branco, que vai abordar esse tema tão importante no dia de hoje. Thank you, Branco. Welcome, and I leave it to you now.
Muy obrigado, Luisa. Just want to say bom dia to everybody, even though it's probably dark now in Brazil. So it's dark here as well. I also want to thank the other organizers of the conference. I wish we were meeting in Pelotas at this time of the year, and it's truly tragic that we couldn't do so. I have read the news. I have read about the suffering of people in your region, and I just want to start by saying, that you have my sympathies for everything that you had to go through, and I hope that things are getting better in your lives at this point. So I was saddened to see that the conference had been postponed, but I understand why. And I kind of agreed to do this presentation online to kind of honor the original dates of the conference. So I want to once again thank the organizers, for the honor of addressing all of you tonight. I can't see any of you, and soon, I will switch to my presentation, so I'll be just looking at my screen. So I'll try to imagine that there are hundreds of you on the other side following this talk. So let me at this point switch to my presentation without further ado. Luisa, I hope this is now visible to everyone.
Not yet.
It should be.
Okay, now it is.
Okay, great. So a slight kind of change in the title of my talk. I said that I will talk about generative artificial intelligence in design education, but I've kind of brought back architectural design education. So as you have gleaned from Luisa's introduction, I'm a professor of architecture. So I was a dean of the College of Architecture and Design, and we have other design disciplines represented in it, including interior design, industrial design, and also digital design. So like what I'm talking about in general applies to kind of almost all of the design disciplines that I mentioned so far. I'm not going to go into details as to what generative artificial intelligence is. Will assume that almost all of you know. Below is a kind of succinct definition that I have as captured on the screen. This is from a website of the Harvard University. It's their information technology department that has a separate webpage dedicated to generative artificial intelligence as a way to inform both faculty and students about the variety of tools and also important considerations to keep in mind when using these tools. And I'm going to touch upon these today in my talk that have to do with data privacy, ethical use, copyright, and so on. The reason I show this is that not many universities have been so proactive. And I think it's super important for us to actually encourage the use of AI and generative AI in particular. And engaging these technologies is not the same as embracing them. So I think we need to experiment with them and try to learn from their use, and also educate students about the pros and cons of using these technologies in their education and later in their professional lives. So about a little over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, a number of amazing image generators, text image generators emerged more or less at the same time. Midjourney being the best known among them, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Firefly by Adobe, and so on. And what is common to all of them is a very simple way of interfacing with these technologies. You simply write about what you want, what you desire to see depicted graphically. You then evaluate visually what gets produced by these various applications, and then you iterate or regenerate, like using a same prompts or slight alteration of the prompts and so on. So the way in which the process works: you generate, you evaluate, you select, and then you refine or repeat this kind of sequence of three steps. What is interesting about these technologies is that they are evolving very fast. The truth is that nobody knows where this is going. Some people say that this is a threat to humanity. Some people say it's a threat to certain professions. Some people say that this is going to end many of the kind of creative industries. Some people say that this is an end of writing as we know it, and so on. I do not share some of these doom and gloom scenarios. My attitude towards these technologies is that we should experiment and, more importantly, share findings. This last thing I want to stress, because I was a dean for 3 years, and before that I was involved in the leadership of an organization that brings together schools of architecture. So I missed much of the kind of developments related to AI from 2016, 17 onwards. So when I stopped being a dean in 22, which is right when Midjourney was flourishing, I said, great. There are hundreds of people out there who have been using these technologies, and all I have to do is to do a deep dive into papers that people have published, so then I can figure out how to use these effectively in the studio, in my graphics courses, in my elective courses, and so on. And to my surprise, there was very little that was written about pedagogic experimentation with these technologies. There were some interesting experiments. There were some that were really esoteric, but nothing at the scale and nothing at the kind of breadth of depth or in depth that I was looking for. So I want to stress this, how important it is for all of us, all members of our community, to, again, experiment and share findings through conferences such as Graphica or other conferences that you might be participating in. The reason I kind of want to highlight this is that I've been in a kind of similar situation 35 or more years ago when I was a graduate student, and when computer-aided design was a very hot topic. So in the late 80s, CAD tools were evolving fast. We didn't really know where all of that was going, but we experimented and shared findings. And I want to highlight a particular conference that I consider to be pivotal as a kind of a milestone. It was held at the CAD Futures Conference at Harvard and MIT. It was jointly organized, and its title was Electronic Design Studio. So a large group of people got together, and they shared their findings. They shared how they have used computer-aided design in their teaching. And we need a kind of similar effort and a similar kind of seminal, pivotal event that I think will help us all to kind of engage these technologies more broadly and more deeply. As you have heard from Luisa's introduction, I have been involved with digital technologies for quite some time. I have written books, edited books, but what I can tell you, given all the technologies that I dabbled in, from computer-aided drafting to image processing and computer modeling to computer animation and parametric design, digital fabrication, the generative AI is by far the most impactful technology. I have no doubts that this technology is going to change quite a few things. It's also interesting to kind of go back into the past, and I did a bit of that already by jumping to 89, 35 years ago. But 60 years ago, there was a conference in Boston organized by Sanford Greenfield. It was called Architecture and Computer. And at that conference, in his opening remarks, Sanford wanted to alert the profession to an irresistible force which will radically alter the practice of architecture, whether we plan for it or not. That didn't really, happen. Like it wasn't a really radical transformation of the profession, but I think that these set of technologies, generative AI, do have a potential to radically transform how we design and how we engage design as professions. Given the kind of the dearth of publications and discourse in general related to generative artificial intelligence in design education, about 6 months ago, more than 6 months ago, almost 8 months ago, I convened a panel at a conference of the Association of the Collegiate Schools of Architecture in Vancouver, and I invited 3 prominent members of our community who have distinguished themselves, with their work in their teaching and also research using generative AI. So Andrew Cudless from the University of Houston, Kyle Steinfeld from Berkeley, and Matias Del Campo, who was then at the University of Michigan and who is now at the New York Institute of Technology. So we decided to kind of help others engage these technologies. And I'm going to share a little anecdote with all of you. As I was working on this, a dear friend of mine and a colleague, Andy Brown, sent me a message via LinkedIn. And he kind of, as a tongue-in-cheek, said he asked Professor AI, what are the 4 of us are likely to say in this special session on AI and architectural education? He actually used ChatGPT, so he was just pretending that it was Professor AI. And actually, the result was very accurate. ChatGPT accurately predicted that we're going to cover these 4 topics: how we should embrace the technology, that we're going to talk about ethical considerations, that we're going to discuss collaborative opportunities, and that we're going to discuss educational implications. So in the end, ChatGPT suggested that the speakers would likely provide insights into how AI is influencing architectural education and practice, encouraging critical thinking and innovation in response to these technological shifts. So this is a really good summary of what I'm going to talk about tonight and what I'm going to really emphasize in my presentation. As I said at the outset, it's critically important for us to engage these technologies in our teaching and to help our students develop some core competencies when it comes to AI. And here I'm using the word competency because it's the kind of the terminology that is used in accreditation criteria that we have in design programs in North America. And these competencies really fall into 2 categories: understanding and ability. So I believe that we need to help our students understand what AI is in general. We need to help them understand how AI is being used now. We need to help them understand the ethical issues that are related to AI use because they're really critical. We need to help them develop an ability to think critically about the use of AI. So, in other words, to know what they should embrace and what they shouldn't embrace, how they should use these technologies and how they should not use these technologies. They need to develop abilities to collaborate effectively with AI because many of these technologies are like super capable partners that we can engage in a back and forth. And most importantly, we need to help them develop an ability to use AI responsibly. So I will return to these themes also later in my talk. So what I'm going to share with you now is what I have learned in the classes that I have taught, is specifically a design studio that was focused on the use of generative AI technologies. This is a studio that I taught in the fall of 2023, and I'm also teaching it again this year. And I'll also share with you my findings from an elective course on the use of AI in architecture. So in my studio, I ask students to use Midjourney in the kind of ideation phase of the project. So this is the start of the studio. The students had to design about a 10-story hotel in the city of Newark, and I demonstrated to them how they can easily start Midjourney. You can go to midjourney.com, and you can enter a very simple prompt called Contemporary Hotel in Newark, and this was one of the options that emerged. And then I asked the software to iterate. So this was the kind of the third iteration of this kind of black box with windows of different sizes, the orange glow, and so on. It was quite interesting. And then I show them how this technology is really good in mimicking the style of particular designers. And then we talked about whether this is ethical or not, to kind of ask the software to do something in the style of a certain designer. And if you kind of look at this 4 options that emerged, I'm not sure that Stephen Hall, it's a well-known American architect, would actually embrace them as being kind of in style of what he does. This was just another alternative, replacing Steve Hall with Zaha Hadid, the well-known Iraqi and British architect, late Zaha Hadid, I should say, featuring white, gray, and black colors that are kind of common in her work. And for example, this option that is in the lower right corner is actually quite interesting, unlike the other 3. And that's the one that, for example, could be iterated some more. So this is a kind of quick summary of what we have done. The way in which I designed this studio. So I said, we're going to use these technologies in 3 distinct phases of the studio. In ideation, that is at the start. In design development, to iterate through designs that the students have developed. And finally, for visualization. And each of these steps required students to develop their unique personal workflows, depending on their affinities, their abilities, the tools that they picked up, the tools that they thought worked productively for them. We didn't start right away, right off the gate, with generative AI software with image generators. I actually had them do 3 conventional steps in the first 3 weeks, precedent studies. So they had to learn about hotels, pick the ones they like, present them. We had a site analysis, we had a program analysis, and anybody who comes from the background of architecture and who taught studio can relate to this kind of standard sequence of steps. It was only then that Midjourney was introduced, because then the students knew something about the site, the materiality of the kind of contextual conditions. Then they knew about the social and cultural fabric of the city, and they could then create prompts that can capture some of their findings. So I'm going to show you the work of one particular student, Zehra Dulgeroglu, who was very skilled in writing prompts. So she developed some agility, and as you can see in this description, I'm not going to read all of it. She was going for an industrial aesthetic. She asked the software to create an 8-story boutique hotel tower, and as you can see, it doesn't have 8 stories. It's actually uncertain how many stories it has. And as my students have discovered, Midjourney cannot count and still cannot count. So these are the various iterations that she went through, and she wasn't really happy with the kind of almost photorealistic look of some of these images that were coming out of Midjourney. She kind of wanted to explore some gloomier versions of what she was after. So here she is referencing the work of OMA, Rem Koolhaas. She's being a little more specific of what she was after. And again, some really interesting images have emerged out of that process. But what really unlocked the project for her was this sketch. So she used sketch in the prompt, and this is what she got. She really liked it. And she started kind of iterating these sketches, and she got some more sketches. And none of these were literally appropriated. The point of the exercise was not to actually create designs that the students would then model in 3D and so on, but to actually create points of conversation between them and me as a design critic, so that we can jointly discover their interests, what they want to feature in their design. And I'm going to show you the kind of the final design that Zehra did. And as you can see, there are similarities with what she started with, but then pragmatic parts of the project entered into the conversation. Particular program that she wanted to have, she had to tectonically resolve the building, and so on. So this is architecture specific, but you can imagine being engaged in the design of a product, or you can imagine being engaged in graphic design, or designing an environment for a computer game. You would go through a kind of similar process of trying to generate some ideas, trying to learn about your aesthetic preferences, what you like, what you don't like, what you would like to have, and so on, and use this really as a kind of starting point for the project. Here is another quick illustration by a student whose name is Jacob Passensen. He happened to like Miss van der Rohe's work. This is a mid-20th century architect who made his name in both Germany and then in the US. And his hotel is to be a mix of an urban farm and a hotel. So this is what he got out of Midjourney. And then he kind of tried some additional variations, some additional prompts. As you can see here, like this is the same prompt as here, but you can see that the result is kind of very, very different. Then he even invoked the Japanese architect Toyo Ito. This was actually quite interesting as a project, but it was way too complex, like spatially, in trying to actually decipher how to turn this kind of really interesting looking project into a building. So he struggled with this design, but this is what he came up with. And as you can see, it's strikingly similar to the Midjourney image that he started with. Obviously, it's very different because he had to fully resolve the project. I would also add that we used generative AI, as I said, in 2 other phases in the design development. And we also used it for interior design exercises, for visualization. So the images you see at the bottom were images of 3 key spaces in the building, like the room, the lobby, and some other important space. So all of that was done relatively quickly using Gen AI tools. One of the biggest challenges that the students encountered was how to control the generative process. That was the kind of a point of frustration. It's like you won't give them the 10 stories, you won't give them the 8 stories, you wouldn't do exactly what they were asking for. So we invested a bit of time in exploring that. And I'm going to share with you some strategies that my students used that were kind of productive for them. And again, this applies across all design domains. In addition to text prompt and certain parameters, you can reference an image in Midjourney. So you can, as part of the prompt, enter the HTTP, the web address of some images. This could be your own images, could be your own work that you have done in the past. You just need to put it on some website where it can be accessed by Midjourney. And then you can add some kind of text prompts, and you can then specify certain parameters. So this was very productive for some of the students who actually created their own renderings, or they wanted to kind of reference stylistically the kinds of things that they've done in past studios. For several of them, what worked really well is the blend command. So blend command in Midjourney allows you to upload 2 to 5 images into Midjourney. And you can, for example, the students use the combination of what was initially generated by Midjourney, their own renderings of 3D models that they created, and they simply wanted to get some additional ideas based on the kind of initial images that they started with, but much closer to the geometry that they wanted to have in the project. And here are some kind of things that we have learned in the process, that you should use same aspect ratios, say 3:2 or 16:9, and you use that. You can do that by specifying a parameter, 2 dashes AR, and then the ratio you want. And you can assign image weight, so you can make some images more important than the others. Another thing that we have used is something called ControlNet. It runs on top of Stable Diffusion, which is another image generating platform. You can find it on the web, stablediffusionweb.com. You enter prompts just like you would enter them in Midjourney. But what ControlNet does, it enables you to guide the generative process by using your own sketches or using hidden line renderings from some modeling software and so on. And if you want to try ControlNet, make sure that you use uppercase C and uppercase net in the kind of web address that you see now on the screen. So I'll let you write this down, stablediffusionweb.com/uppercase C, ControlNet, one word, and uppercase N. So here is an example of what I have entered into ControlNet. This is House 6 by Peter Eisenman and hidden line drawing that anybody can create in any modeling software. And on the right is the rendering that I got by simply entering a prompt of 4 words: white building, night view. So this was done in seconds, as opposed to taking hours with the kind of material definitions and lights and so on. And when you are running out of time, and our students are always running out of time, this is a kind of a very quick way to kind of illustrate what they're after in their designs. This is the interface of the ControlNet. So as you can see, all I had to do was to upload the image. This could be, again, black lines on white background or vice versa. And then there are some parameters that you control, image resolution, and so on. There are some additional parameters. You can get a higher resolution if you pay some money. But I think there is a limited number of free images for those of you who want to experiment with this technology. So a line drawing, a sketch, or a hidden line drawing, from modeling software can help you very quickly create visualizations of your design. And this can be anything that is 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional. Could be a design for a poster, could be a design for a website, could be a design, for a product or a building, as shown here. If you have an existing design that you would like to explore this technology, you can create a so-called edge map by using Photoshop and filters in Photoshop. So there is a filter called Find Edges in Photoshop, and you see its results on the right. So you can feed an image like this into Stable Diffusion, and you can get some interesting designs. Like if you want to explore different material conditions on the building, or if you want to have a different background, the sunset, different kinds of trees, and so on. So in addition to edge maps, sketches, line drawings, we can also drive precisely the kind of the genesis of images with so-called depth maps. This is what we can generate using 3D modeling software. So things that are closer to us are shown in lighter colors, and things that are further away have darker shades of gray. Another way of using this technology is through segmentation maps. So you can create colored diagrams, and then you can say anything that is yellow in the image should be a pillow, anything that is blue is a fabric sofa, and anything that is red is a painting. And then you can iterate to the kind of different versions of what these objects could be. We kind of tried ControlNet, but then actually what we settled on is something called Veras. It's an overlay. It's a plugin for SketchUp, for Rhino, and for Revit that I think is based on Stable Diffusion technology, which is actually open source. And ControlNet is also open source. So they have created, Evolve Lab is the name of the company. Here is the web address at the bottom, evolvelab.io /Veras, where you can download it. So, and the way in which Veras works, you load it as a plugin, and you simply create a hidden line drawing or a rendering, and then you can bring that into Veras plugin, and then you can simply enter a prompt, just like the examples that I've shown you previously. And Veras has a capacity to kind of recognize geometry in the image, either by detecting edges, depth maps, and so on, to log the image composition before generating iterations. This worked for some students. It didn't work for others. But as I said, different students developed different workflows using different tools. And you can also let Veras kind of change geometry of your project. So I think a paid version requires that. So you have a slider where you can actually let Veras decide how much of your geometry should be respected and how much of your geometry can be altered, if you're still kind of looking for some ideas as to how to proceed with the project. So you heard me mention several times that each student developed a different, unique workflow. Midjourney and Veras were used the most. They all started with Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. For the development, the one thing that kind of turned out to be the most productive was Midjourney using blend command in it. And then for the final kind of visualizations and renderings, they used Veras, and they also used generative fill in Photoshop. So if you're using version 25 of Photoshop, look for the feature called generative fill. You choose an area of an image that you want to alter in some way, and you simply state what you would like to place in that part of an image. And you can also Google for generative fill in Photoshop online, and there are many videos that demonstrate how these option in Photoshop can be used very effectively. We also had interesting conversations about which one is better, like generative AI or parametric design. And generative AI kind of won hands-on when it comes to ideation. It was also preferred when it comes to kind of design development. And there are reasons for these preferences. As I've shown you, it's very easy to explore ideas using Gen AI technologies. It's very fast to do so. You can be also very explicit about what you want, very intentional. Unexpected results could emerge out of the process. And one has the kind of the notion of co-authoring with this tool, with these tools, because you use text prompts to kind of guide the process of generating some interesting images. So it's not only easy to learn and use, it actually expanded capabilities on almost every single student that I had in the studio, and also made them more productive because it took less work to visualize the ideas, to communicate some of the concepts that they were interested in. So we had very productive conversations. And I want to stress that the point of using these technologies was not to automate what they were doing, but to augment, facilitate, and expand what they could explore in the context of the design studio. In my elective this last spring, we got to experiment with some text to 3D generators. Some bad news for architects. They can't produce buildings yet, but if you're into game design or if you're involved in computer animation and so on, you can use some of the kind of programs listed here to generate figures of characters, animals, humans, cars, furniture, and so on. But if you ask any of these Gen AI 3D generators to produce a complete building, you would be very disappointed. There are also image to 3D generators where you can actually upload an image. Let's say something that you generated with Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or any of these platforms, and now you want a 3D model. Well, we still have a long way to go to get them to give us something productive. And here are some of the kind of programs, some of the platforms that my students have experimented with. Meshi turned out to be the best of the bunch. But again, things are evolving very fast in the kind of realm of 3D generators. So there could be some new developments that you might want to kind of look at and kind of do a bit of Googling to see what's the latest and what's the greatest when it comes to 3D model generation using AI. This being an architecture studio and an architecture elective, we also looked at floor plan generators because there are now programs that actually promise to generate complete architectural plans using AI-like interfaces where one enters a text prompt and then kaboom, automatically a floor plan of the building emerges. One that caught our attention was Finch 3D that promises to generate floor plans. According to their website, Finch utilizes AI, graph technology, and algorithms to enhance architects' designs. It can do the following things: optimize designs and iterate to find the best solution. It can rapidly generate design iterations, allowing exploration of more options, but it's really limited at this time to residential buildings, and its typologies are also relatively limited. What I think lies behind many of these programs, and it's really very hard to discern what's the kind of the technology that powers them, what are the models, mathematical models that kind of drive their operation. And what I suspect that's happening is that many of them rely on parametric design engines, and they simply create fronts where you enter a textual description that is then mapped into the parameters that drive the parametric model. So I'll be happy to hear from any of you if there are, Sherlock Holmeses out there, who are interested in detective work. If you again, can figure out, or if you have access to the information how some of these programs work, please feel free to share them with me. Branko, my first name, at njit.edu. So here is one that I think operates in that fashion. It's called Hypar. It's started by two key developers behind Autodesk Revit, and then they decided to start this company that generates complete BIM models of the building. So anybody who has had to use Revit, you know how much effort you need to put into it. And then they wanted to kind of simplify that process by creating a new AI-powered technology. So from what I was able to glean, we could develop some very effective applications using parametric design generation that has as a front interface something that resembles the platforms that I've mentioned so far. So based on machine learning, where machine learning is related to sets of parameters that can generate interesting three-dimensional designs. This is a kind of good topic to research because it's easy for us to create synthetic data sets that contain this kind of lists of parameters that generate interesting products, interesting geometry. And then we can use this thousands and thousands of parametric sets to kind of use to train some machine learning algorithm, what works and what doesn't work, and then create an interface that maps the text we enter to the parameters that produce something interesting that can then result in the generation of a 3D model. I'm just going to briefly mention another area that I'm super excited about. It's performance prediction. So for anybody who has to design objects that perform, you may need to analyze their structural stability. You may need to analyze, let's say in case of buildings, the heat gain or heat loss, or you may need to analyze wind comfort, or if you're doing interior design, lighting levels, and so on. And all these technologies rely on these rainbow diagrams that go from blue to red, but red is bad, but blue is also bad. And where you want to go is the kind of green colors that you see in the middle. So the software that we use is in the kind of category of performance simulation, and there are problems in using this software. You need to know quite a bit about the domain in which you're using the software. So you need to know quite a bit about structure or structural design. You need to know quite a bit about lighting or energy performance and so on. The tools to do simulation require high resolution modeling. These tools are not simple to use. They're computationally intensive, and there is no representational integration. You make a 3D model, let's say of your building, you would need to actually have a different model for the energy analysis. You would need to have a different model for the lighting analysis or for the acoustic analysis and so on. So as I said, these are the issues. Because of them, they emerged more than 20 years ago. I was super excited about them, and I thought these are going to be the new visualization tools that will enable us to visualize invisible phenomena, make visible invisible phenomena in buildings. But then there was very limited presence of these tools in academia or in the profession. And these analytical studies, performative studies of our designs are often done by engineering consultants. Now, there are people who are exploring performance prediction using machine learning, where the objective is prediction and not simulation. These are often based on synthetic image data sets, because anybody who has engaged this technology and as a kind of at a fundamental level to develop tools, the biggest challenge is having data. You need data, and not just a few images. You need thousands and thousands of images or data sets to train some algorithm to produce some new designs, new information. So some of the tools that have been developed are actually fast, but not very accurate. And for architects, I think that's perfectly fine. Being kind of 80%, 85% kind of correct is good enough, and that's actually not good enough for engineers. So there is a group of researchers in Austria, at the Austrian Institute of Technology. They developed something called infrared. The website is infrared.city. They call it Intelligent Framework for Resilient Design, where you can get lightning fast climate simulations. According to their website, it's 99% faster than conventional simulations, provides 90% accuracy, and at a tiny fraction of the cost related to conventional simulations. So what you're looking at is a placement of 2 high-rise buildings in an urban context, and we are looking at the kind of wind flows, the wind analysis, the air flows around those buildings for a kind of particular direction of the wind. And this is done in real time, where the geometry can be manipulated in real time, and then you get instant feedback. So as I said, you can do that for wind speed, wind comfort, solar radiation, and kind of sunlight hours. And this is how the results look visually. And what is really stunning is that what they've done is super clever. They developed synthetic data sets. We have access to free 3D models of almost any city around the world. So you can, it's called, I think, open maps, open 3D maps. So you can take, I say, a fragment of the city. You can try this in Pelotas or Florianopolis or Rio or Sao Paulo. You then develop height maps that are black and white images. Like some of you may remember the depth maps that I was showing before. And to neural network that kind of indicates the heights of the buildings. And then you can then have these 3D models analyzed using actual simulation software, and you can automate the generation of simulation images over days, and you can easily produce thousands and thousands of images. And then you can train some neural network to take these 2 sets of images to produce predictions based on what it has learned, what it has seen. So here you see the comparison between the simulation results and the kind of predictive results they got using their machine learning model. They used a generative adversarial network. I'm not going to go into details, but it's a kind of way of it's a way of it's a neural network that can be trained in a particular way, again using pairs of images, in this case solar radiation. And then what they've done, they essentially use the Unity game engine to have these images generated almost on the fly as texture maps underneath the kind of the 3D model that is then manipulated. So this is what kind of makes it real time. It's not a simulation, but it's a kind of prediction of what could be. And this is just a kind of small fragment of the kind of image data set that they created to kind of train their GAN, generative adversarial network, to kind of produce this predictive images. So these 2 are kind of an illustration of the kinds of things that are interesting research-wise, where we can again use images abstracting contextual conditions and produce this kind of predictive images, rainbow diagrams, that can kind of give us a very quick feedback as to what works and what doesn't. For those of you who are interested in robotics, let's say digital fabrication using digital robots, the latest and the greatest is the emergence of the kind of vision language action models, so-called VLAMs, where you can actually use text, images, sensor readings, rotation of joints, position of actuators, and so on, to train robots how to perform. Again, this is cutting edge stuff. So instead of elaborately programming or reprogramming the robots, you can actually control them using simple text prompts. I want to wrap up kind of my talk today with the discussion of the kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So far I kind of focused on the good, and I will start by saying that I kind of agree with the ethos of, in this case, Google, where the chief executive of Google, Sundar Pichai, kind of said that their goal is to make AI helpful for everyone, to improve knowledge and learning, to boost creativity and productivity, enable others to innovate, and build and deploy responsibly. And I fully endorse this kind of 4 goals, these 4 objectives. And I think AI can deliver those. But then I kind of like to think of something that David Bowie, the famous musician, who was super excited about internet, kind of said in an interview he gave in '99 to a kind of bemused interviewer, where he said that the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. And it was striking at that time. We were still waxing lyrical about what internet is going to do, how amazing it's going to be for the society and culture, and how it's going to actually enable societies to be more democratic and so on. And we all had a chance to see how internet had been abused in various societies, and how it can be used for nefarious purposes and so on. So I would like to kind of paraphrase David Bowie, and kind of say that the potential of what the generative AI is going to do to our professions, to culture, to society, both good and bad, is yet unimaginable. And that, I think, puts an onus on us to experiment, to discover, again, both the good and the potential bad that these technologies can do. Because there are clear opportunities. We should aim for augmentation and not automation, as I've been stressing in the conversations that I had with my students and with my colleagues. We are going to develop entirely new workflows that incorporate generative AI tools. And as of now, based on the tools that exist and based on my own experience, we can deploy them very effectively in ideation, in iteration, in iterative development, and in visualization. There are some issues. The tools that we use are black boxes. We don't know what is inside them. We don't know how they work. And that's a problem. And the companies that make these tools, very few of them state openly how these tools work. Stable Diffusion, as I said, is open source. Anybody can download and compile Stable Diffusion and run it on their local computer. There is bias in the algorithms. Like, I have a student who is from India, and the student wanted to reference the work of a famous Indian architect, Doshi, and then the software that we use doesn't really know much about Doshi's work. It simply hasn't been trained on enough of Doshi's projects. So there is a clear bias in the data. Then there is the question of copyright. Who owns the output? Like in Midjourney, like what you generate actually becomes property of Midjourney. You do not own rights to it. There is a issue of data privacy. Who owns the data that is generated with these tools? And then there are all sorts of ethical issues, related to the use of AI, because most of the users of Chat GPT that I'm sure everybody has tried who is listening to my talk tonight, most of the users are students, and they're using it to write papers, or if they're kind of more ethical about it, they're going to use it to generate questions that they should answer in their own writing, and so on. And then there is an energy footprint, which is not negligible. These AI software needs to run on some really powerful machines. There is no output copyright. The United States Copyright Office actually has ruled recently that the users of generative AI software are prompters. They're not creators. And it's actually worth reading what their ruling says. When an AI technology receives solely a prompt from a human and produces complex written, visual, or musical works in response, the traditional elements of authorship are determined and executed by the technology, not the human user. This is important to keep in mind. So if you use Midjourney, if you use Stable Diffusion, if you use DALL-E, you cannot claim copyright over those works. My colleagues who teach theoretical subjects are very concerned about the use of generative AI technologies, such as ChatGPT. I think it's perfectly fine to outline rough drafts of the papers. Like in my elective, students wrote research papers, and I encourage them to ask ChatGPT to create rough drafts. I have asked them to actually ask ChatGPT what kind of questions they should ask when writing a paper on a particular topic. ChatGPT can help them improve writing. And actually, I got some really good, well-structured, readable papers in my elective. But then we haven't really tried in one of my classes, but AI can listen to lectures and actually summarize them. So, some of my students in the future may decide to skip my lectures and simply ask AI to kind of summarize the key points for them. And there are now tools that can transcribe lectures and produce notes. I'm going to experiment with them in my elective in the spring. The point is to experiment. And our students, as being incredibly creative and agile people, are the kind of perfect co-researchers in exploring the potentials of these technologies. So here is something that is available now called TurboLearn AI. So students can get instant notes, flashcards, actually quizzes. We can produce quizzes and more. They can produce flashcards for them to learn, let's say based on the lectures that you give or that I give. As I said, there is abuse. Students who will write the entire papers with ChatGPT. So we now have detection software that can tell us if something is written by an AI chatbot, but then sometimes the results are actually faulty, they're not correct. We should not ban ChatGPT, in my view. We should focus on how it could enhance the learning of our students along the lines of what I just mentioned, to produce rough drafts, to ask ChatGPT to formulate the questions that they should try to answer in their papers, to help them improve writing of what they have written. And we need them to acknowledge the use of AI tools. So I tell my students it's perfectly fine to use these tools in my classes, but I want you to be honest about it. Like say, I've used ChatGPT for this and that. I used Midjourney for this and that, and so on. We now have software, like for those of you who are doing your own research or who are supervising research students, we now have software that can help with the source retrieval and actually synthesis of what is retrieved. So there is a consensus app that can help you find the best science faster. So I kind of plugged in. I want to learn about the impact of AI on architectural education, and then it's supposed to spit out the kind of the references to the papers that have been written on the subject. That's the kind of resource retrieval that I was talking about. The unriddle.ai can help you or your students read research papers faster, quickly find info in documents, simplify complex topics, take notes, and write with the power of AI. This app promises students to save 4 hours on their next paper. Interesting. I haven't tried Unriddle, but I will. And then recently I came across this article that AI scientists have a problem, that AI bots are reviewing their work. So I don't know if Graphica reviewers, if any of them used AI to kind of review the papers. You can actually, ask ChatGPT, and it can say, please read this paper and provide with a 200-word summary of its strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, that's unethical to do. So, and I think there's going to be a challenge for associations, such as Graphica, to figure out how to ethically define the use of AI technologies, both in paper submissions and also in paper evaluations, and also in providing feedback to the authors of the papers. So some people are deeply disturbed by these technologies, and some professors do something called prompt poisoning. Then you can place hidden text in the kind of assignments that you give to your students to catch cheaters. So you can, include an unrelated phrase, and if it happens that that phrase begins to emerge in what they have written, that then they used AI. Some argue that learning requires friction, and that it's not our job to make the learning by students easier and faster. So I agree that learning requires friction, but it shouldn't require too much friction. We need to aim for open disclosure of generative AI use, and we need to develop standards of conduct, whether that is production of output in our classes or production of papers for research conferences, as I've just outlined. There are some interesting things on the horizon that are going to make things even more challenging for us. The latest thing that has emerged are the kind of so-called large multimodal models, LMMs, which can actually mimic human skills, speech, vision, and so on. There is now OpenAI's that released GPT 4.0 that can mimic the voice, the appearance. I mean, people can produce, if somebody had recorded, let's say, this thing on YouTube, my lecture, they can produce fake lectures by Branco. And I'm thinking that, maybe I can deliver an even a better version of my lectures by recording my lecture, feeding that into GPT 4.0, and I could get a superbly delivered lecture, with right rhetorical flourish, with ups and downs and good mix of anecdotes and so on. So that raises interesting questions. That's how we're going to teach in the future. Are we going to have, robotic versions of ourselves delivering, some of our classes? I think AI is going to complement lots of things that we do. It's going to enhance and elevate our abilities, intelligence, and performance. We should actually begin to talk about hybrid intelligence, where what we do is augmented by these AI technologies. We should actually discuss performance synergies between the two. And we should also openly acknowledge the existing information and capability asymmetry that exists between us and our human intelligences and artificial intelligences that are provided by the kind of variety of technological firms out there. The point is that we need to experiment to help ourselves as teachers and also our students to develop essential AI competences, and I outlined this at the very beginning of my talk, and I want to also end with them in my talk. We need to understand what AI is. I think each of us has an obligation to do so. We need to understand how AI is being used now. We need to understand the ethical issues. We need to have an ability to think critically about the use of AI. We need to have an ability to collaborate effectively with AI. And we need to have an ability to use AI responsibly. The tools are evolving fast. Again, I want to stress we don't know where this is going, but we should experiment and share findings. Share findings through the conferences such as Graphica and others, and do so with diligence and enthusiasm. That's the end of my talk, and I want to thank all of you for your attention tonight. I went longer than I thought. I thought it would be 50 minutes, but I hope that you didn't mind that I went over time a bit.
Not at all, not at all. Do we have time maybe for a question or two?
Yes, yeah.
So we had some questions coming in the chat. So I'm going to...
Yeah, I see on the screen from... Yeah, this is the latest one, I guess, that came in. I'll let you moderate the questions.
Yeah, that's... it's quite a long question. There are a few parts, so there's that part. I have a question regarding the creative process itself. If we look at some theories of the act of creation, especially reading Arthur Koestler, the idea is that creativity rises from a clash between conflicting matrices or ideas, perceptions. And there is a big difference from what happened with CAD and AI. What do you think about AI inadvertently reducing the creative potential?
This is a very good comment and a very good question. Based on what I have experienced so far, I don't think that these technologies that I've used in my studio and in my classes was reductive in any way. Actually, it expanded what my students did. And especially for students at the undergrad level, I think this could be very effective to let them consider things that they would not have considered otherwise.
I also... Okay, there's one more.
Yep.
Considering that AI is also based on machine learning, the evaluation criteria for a revision using AI wouldn't it reach a level that a human being wouldn't be able to?
I don't know. It's like we haven't really used AI is actually being used in several domains to do evaluations of images. For example, in the medical context, like it's being used in diagnosis, and actually it is augmenting greatly what the specialists are doing. So if they're looking at X-rays or they're looking at MRI images and so on. So there are very successful examples of these technologies being used to do evaluative functions. Where things become problematic is the AI being used to evaluate applicants for jobs by looking at their qualifications, or AI being used to evaluate the performance of employees, based on the data that is collected about their performance and so on. So it depends on the kind of evaluation that is being done. And this is where there's a potential for harm. If you remember the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I think this is where we can go into the territory of the bad and the outright ugly. And I think we are going to see some probably unfortunate examples of AI being used in kind of questionable ways, especially when it comes to evaluation. of what we do as humans.
If I may also ask
Sure.
a question. I was very interested when you were talking about your studio class.
Yep.
And you showed some images of the beginning of the process, but then you
Yep.
also mentioned that they also used AI in developing the design
Yes.
itself. Can you tell us little bit more of how that happened, and what stages, for what kind of thing they were using the AI in the development, not the rendering of images of the project?
So they use Midjourney to create some interesting images, and these images are highly seductive. So, and they were seduced by the imagery. But then comes the hard part. Okay, now create a 3D model of the building, develop a form of the building, its massing, begin to articulate plans, and suddenly what they produce is not nearly as interesting or aesthetically appealing as what they have produced initially. So then the suggestion that I made was like use Midjourney and then reference the kind of a rendering that you made of your design and also the initial image, like that's with the imagine prompt or blend command. I would say use the blend command and then use that initial image that you like so much, give it the greatest weight, and then feed into it the kind of the renderings of the designs that you made. And that actually worked for some of them. Veris was actually less useful because it would pretty much stick to the geometry that the students developed. But there were some of them, who were stuck. I would, make suggestions as what they should do. And obviously, the students' talents and abilities vary a lot. So this has helped, some of them develop some interesting alternatives that they were not considering. So as I said, there was no formula, like no two students use the same workflow, which I find super interesting. They each develop their own workflows, how to actually engage with these technologies, and that's exactly the kind of experimentation that we need. We as professors, and they as future professionals.
Thank you, Branko, so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure.
And I haven't given up on bringing you here in person.
Okay, would gladly do so. So anytime. I would gladly. I've been to Brazil, several times, as you know. So it's like I'm in love with the country and the culture and the people. So it's like completely open to it. Thank you all for being patient with me tonight, listening to what I had to say, and I hope you found it kind of valuable in your future work. So, and again, I hope to meet you in person. I may come or not, like in May, like when you all gather in Pelotas. I wish you a successful conference if I do not show up then, and I wish the association many good gatherings in the future. I guess this is the first one after the pandemic, so there was a kind of a bit of a pause. So, and I hope that there'll be a lot more discussion about AI in the kind of future gatherings of Graphica. So, thank you all, and good night, everyone.